Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I'm going to continue on with the plant review series. I've got a playlist that I'll put right at the top there. If you want to go and see any of the other reviews, feel free to do so. But today we're going to be talking about the awesome plant in front of me, which is the Monstera Siltepecana. Now, for the new people here, welcome. For the old people that have come back for more, thank you for coming back. As always with these videos, I'll try to put some chapters down below, so if you want to skip ahead to the first section, please do. But for everybody that's new here, essentially what this is, it's a review series which I'll do a video on specific houseplants that I've had for a relatively long period of time and talk about what my experience has been with these plants. I'll usually give some background, what my experiences has been with the specific plant in terms of its speed of growth, the ease of propagation, any pest pressures, any accessories that I would recommend for this plant. And then I would wrap up with some final thoughts and kind of a score for the plant as well. Usually at the very end as well, I'll add a little bit of a B-roll, which will have more close-ups of the actual plant. If you want to see some more of that, that's usually at the very end of the video. Some ground rules though, however, these review series are based on my experiences, in my conditions, in my environment, with the care that I give my plant. And if you're new joining here, I'm based in the UK. I grow most of my plants in a conservatory in the UK, and all that entails. However, I do encourage people that if you've got this plant and your experiences are similar to mine or they're different, please do put it in the comments down below, because I'm sure it will help a lot of other people out there when they're looking to potentially get this plant. There's no real repository of places where you can actually find reviews on a plant. You can on plant stores, but not necessarily on plants. But yeah, let's dive into the first topic, which is background. So the background on this specific plant, and this is one of 3 or 4 plants that I've now got, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you might be able to see. This is the Monstera Siltepecana. There are multiple cuttings in this actual plant itself. You might be able to see that kind of telltale silver marking. The kind of lighter bit that you're seeing on the video is probably not coming across as silver. I struggle so much to get silver plants to look silver on the screen. But it's a very, very cool Monstera that can have smaller leaves, and I'm trying to find some tiny little bitty baby leaves like that one there, but then they can also grow and become much more significant, and I'll see if I can bring one of the bigger leaves from the top down. Ignore the holes. I think that was either pest damage or some sun damage. However, if I am not mistaken, the hole on this leaf is a fenestration, and that is another point as well. This plant, if it gets really mature, if I'm not mistaken, can fenestrate. But anyway, let me give you a bit of background on how this plant and the rest of the plants came into my care. So, interestingly enough, I have never bought a Siltepecana. Most of them have basically come from other people, really. So I was talking with a planty friend who gave me my first one, and that isn't this one. It's right at the back, in between all my shelves. I don't know if anybody else has this, but there's certain plants where they've got a specific location, especially if they're self-watering. As long as I can do the flushes, they don't tend to move very much from where I put them, because especially vining plants like this that have kind of wound around other things, where the only way that I can take them off is to cut them off, I tend to let them be. But that plant came to me from a friend who, and this is before I'd started with pon, and she'd been dealing with pon, or basically growing in pon, for a while, and she wanted to see what my experiences would be growing in pon, some similar plants that she had. And she'd asked me, look, have you got the Monstera Siltepecana? And I'm just like, no, I've come across it a few times. It wasn't something that necessarily spoke to me. I have changed my mind slightly with that one, but So what she did is she sent me a bunch of plants, one of which was the Monstera Siltepecana. If I'm not mistaken, that was a kind of a rooted cutting in pon. And she just like grow it and see how it goes. Can you get the slightly more mature leaves? Can you get more silvery? What your conditions are and all these things. And I've kind of already fed back some of this information with her. And if she is watching this, we do need to catch up soon anyway. So drop me a DM and we can catch up on how some of these plants are doing. But yeah, that was the first one. And then I had a plant swap and we're swapping quite a few plants. One or two of the plants that I got, I think it was two from two different individuals, got Siltepecana cuttings, which I think one was grown in soil, which was this one, I think. And then there was another one that was grown in pond, and I've got that somewhere else as well. And there was another plant swap that I went to recently. If people that have been around might know this, there was another plant swap that I went to in London, and one of the plants that I swapped with was another Siltepecana. I seem to be collecting them like Pokemon cards. None of them are particularly different from each other. I just like to have more Siltepecana, which is interesting because actually this plant, anybody who's grown it for long enough, you can propagate this relatively easily, but I'll touch on that on ease of propagation in a minute. But yeah, and that's how multiple plants came into my care. And yeah, and essentially I've been growing them since then, really, both in pon and in my usual aroid mix, which is what this is in, and in a terracotta pot. And the people that have watched my conservatory tour know why I'm looking up. I'll put a link up there if you want to see why. But yeah, this is definitely a very, very cool plant. And I like the fact, as with most plants that have a bit of a backstory, by default, they have a bit more meaning to me. And I think they would do for most people. So even if it's a plant that you've been wanting for a long time, if there's a cute story to go behind the plant, it almost instantly means that that plant has a more emotional attachment to you, or you've got more emotional attachment to that plant, I should say. So yeah, but this is definitely all of them, all those different Siltepecanas have got a very special place in my heart. But yeah, let's move on to the next topic. If we're looking at speed of growth for the Monstera Siltepecana, it is a relatively fast grower. I will say that. It's interesting because I've tried different ways of propagating, and I will touch on that in the propagation section. But some of them are faster than others to get started, basically, as a plant. But speed of growth for this one, it does grow a bit like a weed, basically, and I'll bring this one down as well. And what you might not be able to see, and I'll bring it up and you might be able to see this, I'll try and capture this in the B-roll at the end as well. The janky support sticks are going for the win for this one, but there is one stem and it's wrapped around about 3 times, I think. But yeah, it's just definitely one that I think could have really benefited from a moss pole or even a plank. But again, I'll touch on that on accessories. In terms of speed of growth for this one, however, and I will do my usual thing in terms of benchmarking this against golden pothos that I've got, and I'm looking at it right down there. If a golden pothos in the summer will bring out 2 or 3 leaves each month, and in the winter might bring out 1 leaf a month, this will keep up with that. This is almost to the same level of growth. Actually, I think this might be more productive than the golden pothos in the winter, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily a faster grower than the golden pothos in either season, but it's a bit faster than the golden pothos, specifically in winter, I have found. Obviously, I'm talking about a relatively established plant, but yeah, it's relatively fast, I will say that. One thing that I will add onto the speed of growth is that apical dominance is a bit of an interesting one with this one. Every time I've cut it, only one other node will activate rather than getting branching. At least that has been in my experience. If you do have the Siltepecana, and you've seen when you've cut it that you've got multiple nodes activating and you get a lot of branches happening from the one stem, do let me know. I'm really interested. So ease of propagation. So ease of propagation with this one, it's an interesting one because out of a lot of the different plants that I have, I think this is one that I've propagated in most ways. Have I? Maybe I haven't done moss yet, although I do think that one of the swaps that I got was propagated in moss. So I would imagine it's a relatively straightforward one to propagate in moss as well. But I've done water, and it's done exceptionally well in water. I've done directly into soil. So let me give you an indication. So all of this new growth at the bottom was directly propagated into soil, and it's done really, really well. I've also done direct propagation, cutting straight into pond with a water reservoir, and that worked quite well as well. That's to say that most of these methods that I've tried with this plant have worked really well, and it's been consistent with all these different cuttings from different people in terms of rooting out relatively quickly. It's not that the fastest at rooting out in terms of propagation, but it's a decent speed in that respect. The one thing I will say, and I'm trying to think now which one of all of them was the fastest to get going after it got rooted, and I think it would have been the propagate directly into pond with self-watering. Soil coming in second, and water took a beat to get used to whatever media it was getting put into afterwards as well. But what I found was really interesting, after it's rooted and you kind of place it into whatever growing media it is, obviously the benefit that you get with pond is if you put it in pond with a water reservoir, the reality is you're probably going to leave it in pond with a water reservoir, so you're probably not going to move it. But with this one, when I put it in soil, it did take a beat to get going and start growing. And by a beat, and granted, this was winter as well, but it did take a couple of months basically to kind of get going, which based on how fast it grows and how easily it rooted, that was a bit of a surprise to me. Another little thing that I wanted to say here is a bit of an honorable mention for this specific plant is that a lot of my plants I have moved slightly more juvenile or adolescent, what would you call a teenage plant basically, into pond because I want them to kind of slow their growth a bit and I don't want them to get huge. I generally, and I've done another video on pond and I will link that up the top here as well, but I don't generally move my very, very mature established plants that might be growing in soil into pond just because I'm a bit worried that it's going to knock them back considerably, or they might not grow as mature leaves as fast. This one is an interesting one. I think as long as you give it decent light, and by that I mean bright and direct light. Everybody likes saying bright and direct light. Nobody knows what that means. But let me know if you want me to do a video on, well, at least my best explanation on how to achieve bright and direct light. But with this one, I will say in pond, it does mature. The leaves become more mature, and by more mature, I mean they will start getting the fenestrations, they will start losing some of that silveriness, which is what you get when they start to mature a bit more. And I know there's a lot of people that get this mainly for the silveriness, but I like both the more mature form when it starts losing some of that silveriness, because it does have a really interesting kind of texture and kind of look to the leaf. And I'll see if I can bring it up again so you can see. And I'll try to get a better version of this in the B-roll. You can see the difference between that leaf and that leaf. Granted, this is a bit bleached from the sun, but there's a lot more silveriness on this one. But the texture is still there. So it's still a very texturally interesting plant. But yeah, in terms of ease of propagation, relatively easy to propagate. I would say almost as easy as a golden pothos, actually. So when looking at availability for this one, and again, I can talk only about where I am in the world, which is the UK, and I would assume this is probably quite similar to Europe as well. This does come up. I don't think I have ever seen this come up in a plant store or even a garden center specifically. And by plant store, you heard me hesitate a bit there with plant store. Yes, if you're going to a plant store that has slightly more rare plants, you're more likely to find this. But the traditional plant stores and the garden centers or the big box stores, all of these things, generally you won't find this. And that to me says that this is necessarily one of those plants that has been pushed a lot from any of the Dutch nurseries, at least not here in the UK. I'm not entirely sure. Correct me if you're watching this from the US, but I don't know whether or not this is one that you do occasionally get in the box stores over there. Over here, it's not one that you come across normally quite easily, basically. It's not a particularly hard plant to find if you just do a bit of Googling online and some eBay searching or some Facebook groups. You will definitely find this plant. It's not particularly expensive anymore, at least as far as I'm aware. Even when I got gifted these plants, I think a one leaf cutting, maybe even a rooted cutting, you're looking at kind of mid to low double digits, really. And based on how quickly they grow, it doesn't surprise me. Will it potentially get cheaper? Possibly. I don't think the price has fluctuated too much since when I got it and now. And as always, I'll add how long I've had it will be on the date because, yeah. This isn't one that I think is going to necessarily get more expensive. If anything, it's probably going to get cheaper because it's so easy to propagate. At least it has been in my experience. I wouldn't imagine the price would rise too significantly because, again, they can churn it out a bit more. And I don't know if there's that many people actively searching for this plant. But as with most monsteras, generally speaking, most of my monsteras, you kind of let them do their thing and they'll do their thing. I think, and I might go on the record for saying this, but I think most monsteras, and I'm not talking about variegated plants here, I'm talking of just the kind of natural form of a specific monstera. As long as you get the care kind of okay, you kind of let them do their own thing and they will do their own thing. You don't need to fuss them too much. They're kind of really reliable in that respect. I think. I'm trying to think if there's any that kind of buck the trend. Not any that I own. I'm thinking even my Monstera Dubai that's on the wall and it's struggling a bit. It's still doing its own thing. It's had a bit of yellowing on the leaves. It's had a bit of sun bleaching. It's still there. It's still pulling nutrients from the soil. It's okay. It wants to survive, as most monsteras generally, in my experience, do. Moving on to everybody's favorite, pests. So, pests with this one, and again, I'm going to sound like a broken record because people that have been here for a while know that I'm struggling with mealybugs. This is one that the mealybugs can be attracted to. Will they decimate it really quickly? No. I've also got some whitefly in the conservatory. This isn't one that's kind of been massively attractive to certain whitefly. Spider mites too is not one that this has been particularly attractive to the spider mites to come onto it. So generally, in my experience, this isn't a very pest-prone plant. So accessories for this plant, and I'll bring it up again and you might be able to see immediately what the accessory is going to be that you're going to need. I think I've got 1, 2, 3 and it's still wobbling because I should have set it up better for success to begin with, but support sticks will do a good enough job. You can, I think, have this trailing, and this is one that you might want to have trailing if you want to have more of those juvenile small silvery leaves. Because remember, with most trailing plants that you kind of put in hanging baskets, if you don't give them support, and they're meant to be climbers, they'll climb up the bark of a tree, basically, you will see that the leaves will stay in that more juvenile form. Even on a support stick, however, you will start to see more mature leaves. Certain plants, you need to definitely give them a moss pole or a plank, but even on a support stick, this will start to mature. I think if I want to get truly, truly mature leaves, I would have probably needed to put it on a plank. But so yeah, that's the other accessory, like a plank or even a moss pole would be really good for this. And in terms of other accessories, really, something that you can propagate in, because you're probably going to want to take some propagations of this, because again, what I've done to make it look a bit bushier is I've taken cuttings because it's growing wild and I've propagated them and put them back into the same pot. So this applies to most houseplants, but this is one that, because of, at least in my experience, how quickly it grows, you definitely want to have some propagation vessels ready at any given time to take some cuttings, pop it in, and let it do its thing. It's not any more hungry in terms of fertilizer than any of my other plants would be. In terms of the kind of care, it's obviously still in my conservatory. I let the soil fully dry out before I will water it. However, the plants that I've got in pond and self-watering, other than the occasional flush, they are always in self-watering. I don't have them in a transitional phase without a water reservoir. It's just an easygoing plant, really. Like, you could have it without a moss pole. You could probably grow this in plastic pots, like nursery pots, and I'm pretty sure that's what the people that gave me the cuttings had theirs in. Doesn't necessarily need terracotta. I would definitely suggest a light, airy soil mix. And yeah, like it's just an easygoing one. No real pest thing for this one as well. Just, you can get accessories for it if you want to be a bit extra, not even a bit extra, but if you just want to, but it doesn't need them, I don't think. If you think I'm forgetting of a certain accessory that this plant should have, please do drop it in the comments down below. And then coming into final thoughts with this plant, generally speaking, I'll do the usual thing that I always do. So knowing what I know now, if I didn't have this plant and I had a chance to get it, would I get it? Yeah, definitely. I would definitely get this plant again. It's been super easy to care for, not caused me any real grief. It's done well in different lighting situations. I've never had it in dark or low light situations, but I'm one of those people that doesn't think you should really do that to any plant. But because remember, low light, they can survive in low light, which, by the way, that generally means it's a slower death. But it's not thrive. So thrive, you do kind of need to give most plants that medium or bright and direct light, and they will do okay. Low light isn't that great, basically. But yeah, with this plant, I would definitely get it again. If I was to give a score from 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, where I would kind of benchmark it at, I'd probably give it a solid 7 or an 8. And the only reason why I'm not giving it a 10 is more for personal preference. Love this plant. Does it excite me the same way that maybe my Esmeraldense would, or my big Burley Marks variegata, or my variegated alocasia, which is over there? I'm pointing all the big things. It's behind you, but believe me, they're there. No, this isn't one that's going to go, oh my God, I can't believe I've got this. It probably does for some people. No shade, but yeah, it's a plant that is, I don't know how to describe this. If you want like a workhorse that will just keep on keeping on and do its thing, this is one. It still has those silvery leaves. It's not particularly difficult to take care of. As I said, the only reason why I'm giving this slightly lower score is because it doesn't like get me super excited. It's still a plant that I love dearly, and I said at the beginning of the video, this has got emotional kind of attachments to, or I've got emotional attachments to it because of the stories behind it as well. But yeah, very cool plant. And yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Very easy plant. If you are considering getting something and you don't really want to offer a lot of hassle, and it's not, and it probably isn't, I don't know, it might be expensive. Let me know if it's expensive in your kind of neck of the world. But this is a good one. This is kind of a solid plant to get going, really. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. If you've got your own review that you want to add, please do down below. I know there's quite a few people that do have this. And let me know. Actually, before I let you go, I do have a question. So I've got quite a few kind of quote unquote rare or difficult to come by plants. And I know some people have said, look, can you do some Hoyas? And I can do some Hoyas as well. Are there any common plants that you would want me to kind of do a review on. I know a lot of people have had them for a long time, but even some of the common plants, I mean, with the exceptions of a golden pothos or a Monstera deliciosa, people, yes, they're available, but I don't know if a lot of people give updates on some of these more common plants 2 or 3 years later. The reason why I was giving the example of a pothos and Monstera deliciosa is because we probably all heard stories about these two plants because they've been around since the 70s and nearly everybody had one at some point or another. So there's been stories flying around. But even like, I'm thinking some of the calatheas that have been that are technically common houseplants. Does anybody ever give an update 3 years later, basically? So let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.